He just wanted to watch a movie with his partner. A quiet night, a few laughs, nothing more, but when the theater manager saw them, everything changed. Removed, humiliated, told they made others uncomfortable without cause, without warning. What started as a single moment of discrimination turned into something much bigger. He didn't fight back with anger, he fought with evidence, with witness statements, a viral video, and a calm refusal to stay silent. The system tried to protect itself. The theater pushed back, threats followed, but the truth kept rising. By the time the city stepped in, it wasn't just one voice anymore. It was a chorus of people who had all been told to sit in the dark. This time they turned on the lights. Would you have done the same? Let us know in the comments. And if this story moved you, like, subscribe, and share it with someone who still believes dignity deserves a spotlight. Friday night used to mean something simple for Evan: a break. A few hours to sit back, forget lesson plans, emails from parents, or kids asking for more lines in the school play. Teaching high school drama wasn't easy, but it gave him a sense of rhythm. Fridays, though, were for pausing the script, for popcorn, soda, and a dark theater. That night, he and Caleb were headed to the Highland Crest Theater to catch the opening night of Solar Depths, a moody space opera critics had been buzzing about for weeks. It wasn't exactly Caleb's thing. He preferred indie films that made you sit with a feeling you couldn't name, but Evan loved the spectacle. Spaceships, sweeping scores, and moral dilemmas playing out across starlit galaxies. They parked on the top level of the garage and walked down through the breeze. Caleb wore his denim jacket and black jeans, the collar popped slightly. Evan had on a maroon hoodie with the sleeves pushed up to his elbows. They held hands as they crossed the sidewalk toward the glowing marquee, neon flickering faintly above the box office. Two for Solar Depths, 7:40, Evan said to the teenager behind the glass. The kid nodded, barely looking up, tapped a few keys, and slid two paper tickets under the slot. The smell of butter and soda syrup hit them before they even passed through the doors. Inside, it was already buzzing. Lines at concessions, posters for upcoming blockbusters, a family corralling a toddler with a balloon, nothing out of place. Evan felt the familiar comfort settle in, the way movie theaters always felt like time capsules. Cool air, dim lights, and a crowd all facing the same direction. They skipped the snacks. Caleb didn't like the noise of rappers during dramatic scenes. Instead, they headed straight toward Theater 6. Evan stopped briefly to snap a photo of the movie poster for his Instagram story. Caleb leaned in close to say something snarky about the lead actor's impossibly shiny spacesuit. Evan laughed, bumping his shoulder gently. It was just a moment. A quick, soft laugh between two people who had been through harder things than awkward stares in public. Evan didn't even think about it until he saw a man across the lobby pause. He was standing near the employee door, arms crossed, in a red tie and dark button-up, maybe in his early 50s. Crew-cut, stern face. The kind of man who looked like he'd been disappointed by the world for a long time. He was watching them. Evan looked back for a second, not long, just enough to recognize the expression. That tight-lipped disapproval. It wasn't new, just unwelcome. They entered Theater 6, settled into their seats, row E just left of center. The previews had already started. Evan leaned in and whispered something about the overused font in a toothpaste commercial on screen. Caleb snorted. They didn't kiss, didn't even hold hands again. Just watched the screen, the shared comfort of being side by side. Then about 30 minutes in, Evan felt a tap on his shoulder. He turned. It was the same man from the lobby, now standing at the end of their row, flashlight off, face unreadable. "Step out with me, sir," the man said. His voice was low but firm. Evan blinked, confused. "Is something wrong?" "I need to speak with you outside." People nearby started to glance over. A few heads turned. Evan glanced at Caleb, who was already straightening in his seat. They stood and followed the man into the hallway. The sound of the movie dulled behind them as the door closed. The man stepped aside near a hallway lined with poster frames. "I'm the general manager here," he said. "Ronald Creel." Evan waited. "We've received a complaint about behavior inside the theater," Ronald continued. "Public affection that made other patrons uncomfortable." Evan blinked again. "What behavior?" "You were seen being physically intimate in a family setting. We ask that all guests respect the shared environment." "I bumped shoulders with him," Evan said slowly. "We weren't kissing. We weren't doing anything you wouldn't see in a PG movie." Ronald didn't react. "That's not the report I have, and I need to ask you to leave the premises now." Evan's stomach dropped. "You're removing us from the theater." "Yes." "Based on a report you won't show me." "Sir, this is private property. We reserve the right to ask anyone to leave." Caleb stepped forward, his voice cooler than Evan expected. "Can we get that in writing, the reason for removal?" Ronald's eyes narrowed. "You want a written statement?" "Yes." "That's not our policy." "Then I'd like a refund." "No refunds after showtime." Then I'd like to speak to someone else, Evan said. I'm the highest authority on site. Behind them, someone had come into the hallway, one of the concession workers, maybe on break. She paused, saw the tension, then ducked back into the shadows. Evan inhaled through his nose. Okay, he said. You're removing us because someone said we made them uncomfortable, but you won't say what we did and you won't give us anything to confirm it. That's correct. And you're not doing this because we're gay. Ronald didn't answer. Evan looked him in the eye. I want your name again. Ronald Creel, you can file whatever report you'd like. I will. They left, walked out into the parking lot, the door clicking shut behind them. Under the garage lights, Caleb pulled out his phone and shook his head. I wish I'd filmed that. I don't think it would have mattered, Evan said. He wanted us gone the second he saw us. They stood in silence for a minute, the quiet hum of the night wrapping around them. You okay? Caleb finally asked. Evan nodded. Yeah, just tired of it. He looked back at the theater. The marquee glowed bright, oblivious. Inside, a movie was still playing. Out here, something else had just begun. Evan didn't sleep well that night. He lay in bed staring at the ceiling, reliving the moment Ronald Creel told him to leave. Not what was said exactly, but how it was said, firm, casual, like it wasn't the first time, like this was normal, like removing two men from a theater for sitting quietly next to each other wasn't even worth raising his voice over. Caleb slept lightly beside him. He had tried to shrug it off. Let's just forget it, he'd said. We've got the rest of the weekend. Let's not give this guy power over it. But Evan couldn't let it go, not this time. By morning, he had already drafted a complaint to the corporate headquarters of Highland Crest Cinemas. He kept the language measured, professional. He included the name Ronald Creel, described the sequence of events, quoted what he could remember. He attached a scanned image of their ticket stubs and the exact timestamp from the online receipt. He even described his outfit. Then he hit send and stared at the empty inbox, waiting for something that probably wouldn't come. Caleb was at the kitchen counter pouring coffee when Evan came out of the bedroom. I filed a complaint, Evan said. Caleb looked over and gave a small nod. Good. Evan hesitated. You really okay with all this? Caleb shrugged. No, but I've seen this before. I've lived through worse. Some manager trying to act like he's defending family values. It's old news. That's the part that gets me, Evan said. It's not even about what we did, it's about what he saw before we did anything. The second he spotted us, we were a problem to him. You sure we didn't overreact? Caleb asked, not harshly, just honest. I was going over it all night. There was no escalation, no warning, just a guy who decided we didn't belong. They sat in silence for a while. Caleb finally said, so what now? I wait, Evan said, and in the meantime I let people know. He wasn't usually the type to vent online. He had social media, mostly to post about school theater productions, charity drives, or the occasional photo of his dog curled up in a pile of laundry. But that morning he posted. It was simple, just a black background with white text. My boyfriend and I were removed from Highland Crest Theater last night by the general manager for inappropriate behavior. We weren't kissing. We weren't loud. We were just sitting next to each other. If you're LGBTQ+ and you've had a similar experience there, I'd like to hear from you. He didn't tag the theater, didn't use hashtags, just hit post and left it alone. By the end of the day, it had nearly 100 shares. That night, while Evan was grading papers at the dining table, a message came in. Then another, both from people he didn't know. The first one read. This exact thing happened to me and my wife in 2019. Same theater, same guy. The second one said, I worked at Highland Crest during college. Ronald used to brag about keeping things appropriate. I always knew what he meant. Evan sat back in his chair, blinking at the screen. He scrolled through the comments on his post. Dozens of messages, some from friends expressing outrage, some from strangers. A few described near-identical experiences, same manager, same passive-aggressive warnings, same refusal to put anything in writing. Then he saw a short comment buried among the longer replies. I got this on video, DM me. He clicked on the profile. The name was Iris Mendez, a college student at a local university. Judging by the bio, he messaged her immediately. Within 5 minutes, she replied with a Dropbox link. Evan clicked it. The video started just as he and Caleb were being led into the hallway. The angle was slightly off-center, shot from behind a nearby arcade machine. The audio was a little muffled but clear enough. He heard Ronald's voice. We've received a complaint about behavior inside the theater. He heard himself asking, what behavior? And then the words that settled deep into Evan's chest. You were seen being physically intimate in a family setting. Iris had captured the whole exchange. The way Ronald's tone stayed controlled, like he was reading from a script. The way he refused a written statement. The final line, "You can file whatever report you'd like." Evan watched it 3 times before sending it to Caleb. Caleb called immediately, "That's damning." Evan was already typing. He posted the video, no extra text, just let it speak for itself. Within the hour, it exploded. The comments came faster now. Not just messages of support, but people tagging local journalists, LGBTQ+ rights groups, and even the theater chain's corporate accounts. By midnight, a small local blog picked it up. The headline read, "Gay couple removed from theater without cause. Video sparks outrage." Evan wasn't used to this kind of attention. The next morning, his phone buzzed nonstop. Journalists, activists, strangers thanking him for speaking up, people asking for interviews, students from his school messaging him in support. One even offered to design protest signs, but he kept things calm, focused. He updated the corporate complaint to include the video. He sent it directly to their legal and public relations departments. No threats, no demands. Just the truth, recorded, undeniable. 3 days later, a corporate response came back. "We are aware of the incident at our Highland Crest location and are reviewing the conduct of our staff. We take allegations of discrimination seriously and are committed to maintaining a welcoming environment for all guests." It was a template. Evan read it twice and closed the email. That afternoon, a producer from a local news station called. She wanted to air the video. Evan hesitated, but after a call with Caleb and a conversation with Iris, who gave full permission, he agreed. They ran the story that night. Evan didn't appear on camera, but his voice did. He narrated the situation clearly, calmly, just like he did on stage when the auditorium lights hit and it was opening night. The headline at the bottom of the screen read, "Discrimination at the movies. Local teacher speaks out after being removed." Ronald didn't respond to the station's request for comment. Evan knew this was just the beginning. And this time he wasn't waiting quietly. The morning after the local news segment aired, Evan stood at his bathroom sink brushing his teeth, the soft hum of the electric toothbrush muffled by the running faucet. He could hear the muted voices from the TV in the other room. Caleb had turned on the news again, still a little stunned by hearing Evan's voice in last night's broadcast. It hadn't really sunk in yet that he was on the news, that hundreds of people had now watched him calmly explain why he'd been thrown out of a movie theater, that a short video, shaky and caught from behind a claw machine, had turned a quiet Friday evening into something people were now calling a statement. He turned off the tap and stared at himself in the mirror, still the same, still tired, still trying to decide what this was becoming. When he stepped into the kitchen, Caleb handed him a mug of coffee and said, "You ready for part 2? "Am I supposed to be? Too late to pretend it not happening." Evan sat down at the table and opened his laptop. The night before, Nadine from the LGBTQ+ advocacy group Caleb had contacted on his behalf had sent him a form. It was a formal intake document for discrimination complaints, one they used to help clients compile credible records that could be used in litigation if it came to that. He filled it out slowly, step by step. He made sure everything was precise. Dates, times, location, exact phrases Ronald had used. He attached the video Iris had taken, screenshots of the online messages he'd received, the corporate statement, and a copy of the email he'd sent originally. It felt like assembling a dossier on himself, not just what had been done to him, but how carefully he had responded. When he hit submit, a confirmation email popped into his inbox within minutes. Later that day, Nadine called. "You did everything right," she said. "I know that doesn't always matter," he replied. "No," she agreed, "but it helps when it finally does." She asked if he would be open to a sit-down meeting. She wanted to bring in one of their legal volunteers to walk him through what a formal civil complaint could look like. Not a lawsuit, not yet, just the groundwork. Evan agreed. They set it for the following Monday. By that evening, his inbox had 4 new messages from people he didn't know. Each one had a story, a friend, a cousin, a partner. Each of them had been warned, scolded, or quietly removed from the Highland Crest Theater over the last few years. Most hadn't reported it. Most had assumed it wouldn't go anywhere. Evan replied to every one of them. Kindly, directly, he thanked them for their courage. Asked if they would be willing to share more, even anonymously. He forwarded them to Nadine, copied the threads into a folder he'd labeled Testimonies. He wasn't sure what he was building, but it felt like something that might hold up in court one day. Over the weekend, someone emailed him from a private address. The message was short. "I used to work at Highland Crest. Ronald always made gay couples his business. Let me know if you want to talk. I'll stay anonymous for now." Evan replied, "Yes, I'd appreciate it." They didn't respond again that day, but the email sat in his inbox like a door slightly ajar. The meeting on Monday took place in a small, clean office tucked above a wellness center. The advocacy group's office smelled like lemon-scented cleaner and brewed tea. Nadine greeted him at the door and introduced him to a woman named Alicia Nguyen, who sat with a tablet, already scrolling through a digital copy of his file. Alicia asked questions, clarifying details, confirming the sequence of events. She asked if Evan had any previous complaints with the theater, if there had been any interaction with Ronald before that night. No, Evan said. I've been there maybe 20 times over the years, never once had a problem. She nodded and started outlining next steps. They could draft a complaint to the State Human Rights Commission. They could prepare a separate letter for Highland Crest's corporate legal department. They would collect supporting witness statements, including from Iris, and if others came forward, they could submit a complaint jointly. What are the chances they respond? Evan asked. They'll respond, Alicia said. They'll try to keep it quiet. They'll offer discounts, tickets, apologies that don't admit anything. But they won't want this in court, especially not with a video. Should I go public again? Stay steady, she said. Let the story breathe a little. You already made your point. Now let them catch up to it. He nodded, relieved to have guidance, grateful to not be figuring it out alone. Later that evening, while Evan graded essays in bed, his phone buzzed with a message from a name he didn't recognize. You don't know me, but I saw what happened. My younger brother used to work under that same manager. He quit after being harassed for being bisexual. Said Ronald would give him garbage shifts and make jokes around other staff. Never reported it because he was scared. Evan replied carefully, asked if the brother might be willing to talk even off the record. He's thinking about it, the person wrote. He's watching what you're doing, it's helping. That night Evan couldn't sleep again, but it wasn't from anxiety this time. It was the slow realization that a door had been opened, and more people were standing behind it than he ever imagined. By Wednesday, Nadine sent him a list of 6 other confirmed reports, all from the same theater. 4 of them mentioned Ronald by name. One described being removed after kissing their partner on the cheek in the lobby. Another described being denied entry due to a sold-out show, despite empty seats. One more said their refund was refused after a staff member accused them of being too disruptive when they asked to speak to a supervisor about an anti-gay slur they overheard. The pattern was there. Different details, same shape. The local blog followed up with a second article. This time it included excerpts from Evan's interviews and one from a former Highland Crest staffer who anonymously confirmed that management encouraged a clean image and that Ronald often took it upon himself to define what that meant. They didn't name Evan in the headline this time. They just titled it, "What Happens When You're Not Welcome at the Movies?" The article trended regionally for 2 days. Evan received a call from someone in the theater chain's customer relations office. She spoke politely, said she wanted to offer him 2 months of free tickets and a personal apology on behalf of the company. Evan thanked her and declined. "I'm not looking for free tickets," he said. "I'm looking for change." He hung up, heart steady. For the first time in a while, he felt that what he was building might not just hold, it might actually make a dent. By the end of the week, it wasn't just a few stories. It was a pattern, clean lines, a repeating signature written across years. Each new person who came forward added another thread, and with each thread, the picture sharpened into something harder to dismiss. Evan kept it all organized, a folder on his desktop labeled Creel Incidents. Inside were subfolders by year, by name, by incident type. He didn't know if it would ever see a courtroom, but it felt like building a case brick by brick, and it was becoming a small fortress of truth. A timeline was pinned to the inside of a binder, handwritten at first, then typed out in neat columns: date, victim, incident, witness, any available documentation. Some of the people he spoke to had never told their stories before. One woman said she and her wife had been told to act more appropriate when they laughed during a rom-com. A man recalled being told to go back to whatever club you came from after asking for a refund when the projector broke mid-film. One person had worked the concession stand for 2 summers and described Ronald as a ghost with a grudge. They said he never raised his voice, never shouted. He just made things happen, warnings that turned into firings, shifts mysteriously cut short, locker doors that were left hanging open when they shouldn't have been. The city's LGBTQ+ center offered to host a private listening session for anyone who wanted to share their experience. Evan didn't speak during the meeting. He just sat in the corner, legal pad balanced on one knee, taking notes as people talked. Some were angry, some were scared, some couldn't believe how long it had gone on. When he got home that night, he sat on the couch with Caleb, both of them quiet. The TV was on but muted. "I didn't know it would grow this fast," Evan said. Caleb nodded. "That's because it wasn't just about us. You gave it a name, something people could point to." Evan stared at the muted news broadcast where a different scandal filled the screen. Another city, another cover-up, but the rhythm felt familiar now, the slow boil of silence giving way to pressure, then break. He got a call from Alicia the next morning. "I think we're ready," she said. "For what?" "For the corporate escalation." She laid out what that would look like, a formal letter drafted and signed by the legal team citing discrimination under state public accommodation laws, a request for internal records, previous complaints, employee disciplinary actions. It was the first official step toward legal action, not a lawsuit yet, but something you couldn't ignore without looking guilty. Evan took a breath. "Let's do it." They submitted it that afternoon. The letter was sent directly to the Highland Crest Legal Department. It included Evan's original complaint, the video, and 12 supporting statements from other individuals who had experienced similar treatment under Ronald's management. They asked for a response within 10 business days. The blog picked up the story again. This time, it wasn't just local. A regional news outlet ran a piece titled, "When Public Spaces Are Safe, a Theater Manager's Long History of Silent Policing." It included excerpts from the complaint letter and referenced the growing list of victims. They didn't name Ronald outright, likely for legal reasons, but it wasn't hard to read between the lines. The story started trending on social media. Within hours, Highland Crest issued a second statement. They said they were taking the allegations seriously and had placed the staff member in question on administrative leave pending internal review. It was a carefully worded sentence. Vague, legal, but it meant Ronald was out for now. Evan didn't celebrate, not yet. He knew how these things worked. Leave pending investigation could mean anything, a week of quiet, a reshuffling, a quiet return with no fanfare. Still, the silence felt different now. 3 days later, a whistleblower came forward. It was an anonymous tip, a message sent to Nadine's encrypted email account. The sender claimed to be a former manager at a different Highland Crest location who had been transferred to Highland Crest East, the theater where Ronald worked, for a 2-month stretch in 2021. They described reviewing several guest conduct files that mentioned Ronald directly. According to them, there had been at least 9 customer complaints during that time, most of which had been quietly closed without follow-up. The message included a rough list of dates and descriptions that matched up with stories Evan already had in his files. Alicia sent a new letter to corporate, this time citing a pattern of internal suppression. She added a request for guest conduct logs and communication records between Ronald and the corporate guest relations department. The pressure was mounting. That week, Evan received an invitation to speak on a community panel hosted by the LGBTQ+ Center. It was part of their Voices That Shift policy series. He wasn't sure he belonged there. He wasn't an activist. He was just a teacher who'd wanted to watch a movie without being told he didn't belong. But he said yes. At the panel, he wore a navy blazer and spoke slowly. He told the story again, not just the night of the incident, but the weeks that followed, the messages, the video, the people who came forward not because they wanted revenge, but because they didn't want to stay quiet anymore. He ended his segment by saying, "It's not about a refund, it's about who gets to be comfortable in public and who doesn't." The room was quiet when he finished. Later, someone from the city's Civil Rights Review Committee approached him. She said they were taking a fresh look at how discrimination complaints in public accommodations were handled, that maybe it was time to consider mandatory inclusion training for managers at large chains. It was just a conversation. But it was the first time Evan had seen policy mentioned out loud. Back at home, he and Caleb watched a rerun of a nature documentary. Something about deep-sea creatures with glowing eyes and teeth like razors. At one point, Caleb paused it and turned to him. "You know what this reminds me of?" "What?" "That thing where you think you're the only one who saw the monster, but then you find out the whole town's been hearing it move at night." Evan smiled, tired. "I think it's finally morning," he said, and for the first time in weeks he believed it. It started with a phone call from the school secretary. Evan was walking through the art hallway on his lunch break when his phone buzzed. He ducked into an empty classroom, still holding a plastic container of leftover pasta. "Evan, just a heads up," she said gently, almost like she was warning him about weather. "We got an email this morning, anonymous, no name attached. Said we should know our drama teacher is trying to stir up trouble in the media. They used the word unstable. Said you're bringing politics into the classroom." Evan didn't speak for a second. They CC'd the superintendent. "Okay," he said. "I didn't forward it to anyone else. It looked like a fishing expedition, just wanted you to be aware. Thanks for letting me know." After they hung up, Evan stared at the whiteboard across the room, still half covered in marker scribbles about blocking and cues. He couldn't remember if he had written them or one of his students. He stood there chewing slowly, the taste of tomato sauce suddenly thin in his mouth. The rest of the day passed without incident. No one pulled him into a meeting, no student acted strangely. The superintendent didn't call, but the feeling stayed with him, something sharp pressing just beneath the surface. It wasn't just about the theater anymore. It was about who he was and where he worked. It was about silence finding new ways to make noise. That evening, Nadine called with another update. Corporate had responded to their second letter and the tone had shifted. It was no longer purely acknowledgments and acknowledgments of acknowledgments. Now they were pushing back. They've hired an outside PR firm, she said, and they're quietly running messaging that frames this as a misunderstanding blown out of proportion. They're using words like isolated incident and communication breakdown. They're trying to smother it. Exactly. They're not denying what happened. They're dancing around it, saying it, being reviewed in context. And Evan Ronald's union just filed a complaint of their own against you. Evan sat down on the edge of his bed. What does that even mean? They're accusing you of slander and harassment. They're saying your story has damaged his professional reputation and made it unsafe for him to return to work. Are you kidding me? I'm not, but it's a tactic. They're not trying to win that argument. They're trying to discredit you and exhaust you. Evan exhaled through his nose hard. He rubbed the back of his neck. Nadine continued, they're hoping you'll back off. Settle quietly. They want this to die before it reaches court or worse, public policy. He didn't say anything for a moment, then let them come. The next day, his face showed up on a YouTube video. It wasn't high production, just a talking head in a baseball cap ranting about woke overreach and fake discrimination claims. The man spoke confidently like Evan had personally tried to bankrupt the company. The comments were worse. Evan stopped reading after the first few. He blocked the account, shut his laptop, but that didn't stop the flood of messages. Some were anonymous emails. Others were private DMs on Instagram or Twitter. A few found his school address. Most were subtle suggestions that he move on or think twice before ruining a man's life. A few were harsher, 2 were outright threats. He screenshot everything and sent it to Nadine, who passed them to Alicia. They filed a digital harassment report and looped in a cybersecurity contact from the advocacy group's legal network. Caleb changed the passwords on all their accounts that night. Evan double-checked the deadbolt before going to bed. Still, the next morning, a note was taped to the driver's side window of his car. Let it go before it gets worse. Typed, printed on plain paper, no signature, just folded once and tucked beneath the wiper. He stood there for a long moment before peeling it off. He turned it over, blank on the back. Later, at the advocacy center, Evan brought it to their security consultant. They logged it, took photos, filed a supplemental report, recommended a doorbell camera if he didn't already have one. You're visible now, the consultant said gently. You stepped into the light, that always comes with shadows. Oh. Evan nodded. He went back to work, taught blocking, helped students learn how to project without yelling, sat through a faculty meeting, returned 2 parent calls, smiled when he didn't feel like it, laughed when he needed to. He refused to shrink. That Friday, he attended a city council meeting where the LGBTQ+ committee had been scheduled to speak on public discrimination in commercial spaces. He wasn't planning to talk, he just wanted to be there, present. But when one speaker mentioned the theater story, without naming him, someone from the audience shouted, "People like that ruin businesses." Evan turned slowly, unsure if the words had really been said. A few people murmured. The moderator moved on, but the heat stayed in his chest. After the meeting, a councilwoman he didn't know walked up to him and extended her hand. "You're Evan, right?" He nodded. "My daughter's in high school theater, told me about what happened. I'm glad you're speaking up." "Thank you. I've been waiting for someone like you to put a name to what we've been ignoring." Evan blinked. "What do you mean?" "I mean Ronald isn't the only one." That night, Evan and Caleb walked their dog around the neighborhood. The air was cool, crisp, stars barely visible above the glow of the city. They didn't talk much. Halfway through the walk, Caleb said, "You still want to see that space movie?" Evan chuckled, "The one we got kicked out of." "Yeah." He looked up at the stars. "I kind of do." "You want to go to a different theater?" "No," Evan said. "When we go back, it'll be to that one, but we'll finish the movie when it's ours again." Caleb smiled. "You're stubborn." "Only when I'm right." They kept walking. The hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday morning at City Hall, tucked between a zoning ordinance and a public transit update. It wasn't meant to be a spectacle. No one from Highland Crest's corporate office showed up, just their legal representative, a clean-shaven man in a navy suit who introduced himself once and then kept to his notes. The room wasn't packed, but it was fuller than usual. A few local reporters. 2 students from Evan's school sitting in the back row. Caleb beside him, silent, steady. The council chair called the session to order with a flat voice, and the first item on the docket was titled plainly, Community discussion on discriminatory practices in public businesses. Evan wasn't first to speak. The organizers had planned it carefully. Nadine opened with context, explaining the rise in complaints filed with the LGBTQ+ advocacy center in recent years, especially in service sectors. Then Alicia walked through the legal framework, state and city protections, where they applied, where they failed, and then they called Evan. He stood behind a podium that felt slightly too tall, adjusted the mic once, and looked out over the room. His heart didn't pound this time. It didn't even flutter. It just held steady, like it knew what it needed to say. He didn't read from notes. He told the story as he'd lived it. He described the night he and Caleb had gone to see a movie, how a man they didn't know had watched them for just long enough to decide they didn't belong, how they were told to leave without explanation, how no one would put it in writing, and how the theater refused to return their money but made it clear they'd done something wrong just by being seen. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't make a speech, he just described what happened. Then he described what came after: the emails, the messages, the video, the people who came forward, the stories that matched his, the history no one had checked. When he was finished, there was a long silence, the kind of silence that doesn't ask to be filled, only witnessed. Then a man from the second row stood up. "I worked at that theater for 4 years," he said. Ronald Creel was the general manager the entire time. He hadn't been part of the plan. No one had asked him to speak, but he walked to the front of the room and kept going. He said he'd seen Ronald target people, said it always came down to who didn't fit. He talked about shift changes, scheduling games, the way LGBTQ+ employees were assigned the worst hours or pushed toward quitting. He talked about guest complaints that never made it to corporate. And he said, "I didn't come forward before because I didn't think anyone would believe me. Now I do." By the time the hearing ended, 3 more people had spoken. 2 had left their statements with Nadine ahead of time, 1 had decided in the moment. All of them described a version of the same man in the same building doing the same thing to different people, over and over again. The city council didn't make any decisions that day. They weren't a courtroom. But they passed a motion to review the current anti-discrimination ordinance, and a subcommittee was formed to draft amendments that would require annual public training for business owners and managers operating in protected categories. It was small, procedural, but it was real. Outside the chamber, Evan was surrounded by people. Some shook his hand, others just nodded. Someone gave him a hug and whispered, "Thank you for saying it out loud." That night, Evan and Caleb sat on the couch and ate Chinese takeout. The TV was on but muted again. The dog slept between them, paws twitching in a dream. "You okay?" Caleb asked. Evan thought for a moment. "I feel steady." "Not good." "Not yet, but solid." A week later, Alicia called with news. Highland Crest had offered a settlement. Evan was sitting at his desk grading monologues when the call came through. He picked up without thinking. "They've reviewed the complaints," she said. "They know they're exposed. They want it to go away." Of course, the offer includes a written apology, private, not public, 6 months of theater access, and a donation to the LGBTQ+ center in your name. And no admission of wrongdoing, no change in policy, no comment on Ronald. They want silence. Yours. Evan looked at the stack of papers on his desk. One of his students had written a monologue from the perspective of a mirror. It ended with a single line: "If I'm cracked, it's only because someone hit me." "I'm not interested," he said. "I didn't think you would be," Alicia replied. That Friday, Ronald was formally terminated. The news wasn't announced in a press release. It was quietly confirmed through a memo that leaked to a reporter who had been following the story since the beginning. The memo simply said, "We are ending our professional relationship with Ronald Creel effective immediately." When the article dropped, Evan sat alone on the back patio. The air was warm and still, no dramatic winds, no thunder in the distance, just the quiet of something being finished. He didn't celebrate. There was no victory dance, no champagne, just a slow breath and the knowledge that a door had finally shut and wouldn't reopen. Caleb joined him a few minutes later and sat down without saying anything. They didn't have to talk. The silence said enough. The following week, the City Council introduced a draft bill called the Community Standards in Public Spaces Act. It outlined new requirements for businesses that serve the public, clear complaint procedures, quarterly reports, and third-party training programs. It wasn't sweeping, but it was a start. And Evan's name was in the introduction. He hadn't asked for that. He hadn't asked for any of this. But he'd stood his ground, and now it was written down in city records and policy drafts, and inside the heads of people who would walk into places like Highland Crest and know they had a right to be there. Later that month, a box arrived at Evan's school. Inside was a framed certificate and a letter from the mayor's office thanking him for his contribution to the ongoing pursuit of equity and justice in our public institutions. He didn't hang it up in his classroom. He didn't need to, instead he put it in a drawer. And then on a Saturday night in late spring, he and Caleb walked back into Highland Crest Theater. New manager, new staff, new posters on the wall. They bought tickets to Solar Depths now in its final week and sat side by side in the same row where it had all started. The lights dimmed, the music swelled, the story began. And this time no one told them to leave. Summer crept in slowly. The days stretched a little longer, the evenings softened. School let out and Evan's classroom grew quiet again. He packed away props from the final performance, labeled costume bins, and left a small thank you note for the janitor who always reset the lights before show nights. For the first time in years, he didn't take on a summer intensive or sign up for the district's professional development series. He needed the time. Caleb said it first one morning over coffee. "You feel different now," he said. Evan raised an eyebrow. "That good or bad?" "Good," Caleb said, then shrugged. "You're just more grounded, like you stopped waiting for someone to pull the rug out." Maybe something had shifted during the hearings or the long meetings or the nights they sat together watching the news roll in. He hadn't asked for any of it, but once the door opened, he'd chosen to walk through it. And now he was standing on the other side, changed. He still got the occasional email, mostly thank yous, sometimes a long message from someone in another city, someone who'd seen the clip online or read the articles. One came from a woman in Florida who had been fired from her job at a community center after being outed by a coworker. Another came from a teenage boy who wrote, "Your story helped me tell my mom." He tried to respond to them all. The city council passed the Community Standards in Public Spaces Act by unanimous vote in mid-July. It was a quiet ceremony. No parade, no cameras, just a few handshakes and a signed ordinance. But Evan attended, standing at the back of the room, wearing a simple button-up and jeans. Alicia gave him a soft smile from across the aisle. Afterward, she walked over and handed him a copy of the ordinance with a blue ribbon tied around it. "You helped make this real," she said. "I just told the truth. Sometimes that's the hardest thing to do." He tucked the ribbon paper into his bag and didn't speak much the rest of the day. When he got home, he slipped it into the same drawer where he'd put the mayor's certificate. He didn't need it on display. The world had seen it happen. That was enough. Caleb suggested a trip. "Not a big one," he said. "Just somewhere that has popcorn and quiet." They drove to a lakeside cabin 2 hours outside the city. No Wi-Fi, no schedule, just water and sky and silence. The kind of silence that feels earned. Evan read novels and walked barefoot through grass. Caleb grilled vegetables over a fire pit and played music through a portable speaker, low and lazy. One evening they lay on the dock and looked up at the stars. Evan pointed out constellations from memory. Caleb made up new ones. "You think it's over?" Evan asked. "This part is." "What's the next?" "Whatever you want it to be." Back in the city, the Highland Crest Theater reopened under new management. The company had kept things quiet, no fanfare, but the changes were noticeable. New posters lined the lobby, diverse, bold, inclusive. A large sign by the front door read, "All are welcome, no exceptions." Evan heard about it from Iris, who messaged him to say she'd gone back for the first time since filming that video. She said the atmosphere felt different. "It actually feels like they mean it now." He smiled when he read it, then replied, "Want to catch a movie sometime?" They met the next weekend for a matinee, sat 2 rows behind where he and Caleb had been that night, and watched a lighthearted comedy neither of them cared much about. Afterward, they grabbed coffee. Iris talked about her senior project and Evan offered advice on her interview technique. "You really became part of something," she said, stirring her drink. "I just didn't walk away." "That's something too." When he got home, he found a handwritten letter waiting for him in the mailbox. No return address. Inside, a folded page read, "You don't know me, but I used to be scared of going anywhere with my partner. We'd sit in the back row, never touch, never speak, but I saw your story. And now I sit in the front row and hold her hand." No name, just a small rainbow heart drawn in the corner. He kept that letter. School started again in late August. His classroom filled with new faces, some excited, some anxious. He watched as they adjusted to the space. By the 3rd week, the room started to hum again, laughter between scenes, lines being rehearsed too loudly, light bouncing off the black box curtains in that way it always did around 3 p.m. One afternoon, a student stayed after class. A quiet sophomore named Mateo who barely spoke the first week. He lingered by the door, backpack clutched tight. "I saw you on YouTube," Mateo said, voice low. Evan paused. "Yeah. I just wanted to say thanks." Evan nodded once. "You're welcome." That was all Mateo said. He left the room without looking back. Evan turned off the lights, sat in the quiet. Some moments you hold on to longer than others. They aren't flashy. They don't end in applause, but they stay. That weekend, he and Caleb returned to the theater for a showing of Solar Depths II. It was new, Bigger budget, brighter planets. Evan laughed halfway through, not at the movie, but at the memory of how it all began with a man who couldn't mind his own business and a system that let him do it for years. Now that man was gone. The system had shifted just enough. Evan leaned back in his seat. Caleb reached for his hand, and this time when their fingers met, nobody said a word.